Today we are meeting with Doctor of Ministry student, social worker, motivational speaker, entrepreneur, and author Eleanor M. Fondren. Today I am interviewing her as she talks about her life, past, present, her future, her new book, and what the Lord is doing through her to help others in this world. Eleanor, I want you to tell these viewers something about yourself, about your life.
Okay. Hello. It's nice to be here. Let me say that
Yes,
first and foremost.
thank
Thank you
you.
for having me on your show.
You're welcome. Love to
And
have you.
thank you. Thank you for the lovely introduction. Today, my life is quite different from what it was in the past. Today, I am on my spiritual journey. I believe I started that journey actually the last past 5 years, even though God has always
Mm-hmm.
been a part of my life. I just didn't see it. For
Mm-hmm.
should I go back and tell you a little bit about the past, and then we'll move on
Yes.
to the present?
Tell us tell us a little bit about how you grew up in Chicago and you visited back and forth to Arkansas, and just about how your childhood shaped who you were, and those different things.
Okay, okay. Well, I grew up south side of Chicago. Eight.
Mm-hmm.
I come from a family of eight. I'm the youngest, and my parents divorced when I was eight. I guess eight is like one of them numbers in my
Yeah,
family.
it was a number,
Yeah,
important number.
yes, and so I grew up the youngest, and my parents divorced when I was eight, and my father gained custody of myself and my two youngest brothers. My elder sisters, they were quite older than myself. One was 16 years older, one was 17 years older. So they left and they had gotten married before the
Mm-hmm.
divorce. So they wasn't around when the kind of the trauma. I consider it as a trauma when
Yeah,
that
that's a
happened.
very traumatic
Yes. And so
experience.
my dad, he worked a lot. He worked night shift.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was left alone a lot of times with my two youngest brothers. Actually, it was three, but the older one, the oldest, the third youngest one, when he graduated eighth grade, he left and went and moved in with my mom. So my
Oh,
mom, yeah, she would visit, but it became sparingly once she started a new relationship. So the majority
mm-hmm.
of the time, us three were left alone. And during the day, we had a family business. It was a newspaper stand. My two brothers
Mm-hmm.
would run the paper stand. They had began not to go to school, and one of my brothers, he joined a gang. He wound up joining the gang, and so those were my role models, and I began to follow in their footsteps.
Okay, tell us a little bit about how the trouble began. You say your parents divorced at 8.
When I was
You were
eight,
left alone at night.
well, most of the
You're
time with my
most of the
brothers,
time
yeah.
with your brothers.
Mhm.
You were left alone. Uh, your brother entered a gang. He joined a gang,
Yes,
and then pretty soon you joined the same gang.
yes, yes, I did.
Well, tell us a little bit about how that affected you, and what did it start? What was it, a dark point in your life, or what? How?
Well,
Explain that to us.
now that I look back on some things, people are more adapted to their environment. So back
Mm-hmm.
then, I'm just going to be honest, the gangs were not as treacherous as they are today. We still would help the neighbors and deliver the papers and go to the store for the neighbors. I had a neighbor who would do my hair, and like everyone worked for my dad after school. So to me, it was kind of like a fun thing for in the beginning. It was a fun
Mm-hmm.
thing for me. It was a place of belonging because my sisters
Mm-hmm.
had left. One was in Germany. I think the other one was in Arizona with her family. So I didn't have any female role models around. So I just did what my brother did, and it seemed fun. So and it
Mm-hmm.
was a way of me being able to express myself in a way where I could put up a shield.
A mask.
Yes, a shield.
Wear a
And so,
mask.
yeah. So for me, it really wasn't a bad thing for me but it was more of a protected because it had got to the point where I didn't have anyone to comb my hair sometimes. Okay.
And so, how did that affect your self esteem
Very low.
as a woman?
Very low. I often did not like going to school because I didn't even have anyone get my clothes ready in the morning. So I wouldn't dress myself properly. I didn't know how.
So you were neglected in a way.
It was kind of more like neglect, not abuse, but neglect. But I mean, for my dad, I don't think he really realized it. You know,
he was so busy working.
He was so busy working, and then when he would come home, I mean, my brothers would try. They would try to comb my hair, but that didn't ever go right too good. Yes. So I became a person where when I got teased. And I think that lasted for about a week. I'm going to be honest. Because once I told my brothers and I seen the respect and the people who would protect me, I became one of them. And I said, okay, this is how I can stop this. And so the people who actually were teasing me became the people who I reversed it. And I became the aggressor. And then when they saw that I had the gang and my brothers behind me, they stopped the behavior. So I said, okay, this is working for me.
So, okay. With that said, you talked about how the gang helped you in a way.
Yes.
But when did it become dark?
Well, I'm going to be honest. It became dark for me many years later. Well, I can even say it probably was dark then because I started to experiment with various substances, marijuana, alcohol. I started skipping school. I got kicked out of high school indefinitely for gang affiliation and selling drugs. So it probably was dark even then. I just didn't realize it, because it was just a safe place in a way for me. Because I didn't get the same response that I got when I was being bullied, if that mattered, for the short period of time that happened. And so I can recall one of the person who bullied me asked me to bring money to school one day. And I brought money. And then the day I brought the money, someone told her who my brother was. And she was like, oh, no, I don't want your money. And she gave it back. And then actually she became a part of the gang. And that authority that she had over me that day she bullied me, it turned around and I became like I was high ranking in the gang. So I would use that same mechanism. Not really, I never bullied people, but I knew that if they knew who my brother was, that they wouldn't go any further.
So you had a certain level of power. You had a certain degree of power.
Yes, as a girl, yes.
And so all these power dynamics and relationships through the gang, you utilize them to your advantage.
Exactly. That's it. Exactly. But I saw it become dark once the guns and stuff got involved. And several of my friends began to die. One of a best friend of mine, a good friend of mine, his name was Darren Tynes. He died in my husband's arm from a drive-by shooting. And I was hanging out with him the night before. We was jumping, doing kid stuff, we were young. So we were jumping over trees together and playing tag. I mean, we would do stuff like that. Even though we were gang members, we were still young.
Still children.
Yes. And so the next day, a rival gang came by and shot up the place where everybody hung out at. And my husband was there. Well, now we're husbands. We weren't married back then. That's been over 30 years ago. And so he was there that day. And when Darren died, he died in his arms from the gunshot. So it was stuff like that. Trauma. And people started selling drugs. And it just, our community went from what you call a middle class community where it was not very, it was a nice place to live. People were buying homes there to a place that became infested with drugs. Overnight, and that's when I saw
what kind of drugs?
Crack cocaine, PCP, marijuana, alcohol. Those were my vices, but that was the main drugs. But that kind of transformed later. At first, it was powder cocaine that everyone was on. So I didn't really get introduced to harder drugs like the crack until my experience of moving to California, and then I came back.
You've had several moves.
Yes.
Now you talk in your book about how you married your husband
Yes, we
and
eventually married.
you eventually married and you moved to
Excuse
different
me.
places?
Well, I didn't marry my husband until basically after I began to transform my life. However, we lived in San Diego for 15 years. We lived in New Mexico, Albuquerque. We lived there for 12 years.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, I would leave, I would get so, I want to think of a word to say. I would get just really unhappy with my own life. And I would think if I can travel to these places,
You can start
I
anew.
can start anew. However, not knowing that it wasn't about where I was at physically, it was where I was at mentally that I needed to
Mm-hmm.
change. So
Yes.
I would move and I would send for him. We lived in San Diego for a while and we wind up there hanging out with gang members as well. It didn't
Mm-hmm.
really change much. I tried to enroll back in school because I had got kicked out indefinitely. And so we left San Diego. I moved back to Chicago where I obtained my GED. And they
Okay.
would drop me off every night to go to school, and sometimes they'd be like, "You're not gonna hang out." I'm like, "No, I'm gonna go get my GED." But they would pick me up after school, and I would hang out and party. And I think I worked at a bar for a while, and everybody would hang out at the bar. But I would go to school every day. So I took the test. It was five tests, passed
Mm-hmm.
all of them in one
Mm-hmm.
sitting, so and kept doing what I was doing, partying every night. So that was
Hmm.
like the dynamics of that.
Okay.
Start to see at that point when I moved back to Chicago, everyone that I had known was addicted to crack cocaine at that point, even myself. But I didn't realize I was
Yes.
as addicted because even in my addiction, I began to sell the drug. So I didn't think I was
Mm-hmm.
addicted. I thought I had a handle
It
on it.
wasn't a problem for you. You
Well,
you thought it
I thought
wasn't.
it
No, it's
wasn't
a
a
problem.
problem. I thought it was something that I could just do to have fun. But I began
Yes.
to see patterns, even in myself. But I felt like, well, I don't do it as much as them, and I keep a little bit of money. But I did have some other habits that I would do to get money, besides working for my dad, working at a bar. I never kept a real permanent position. I had guy friends that would give me money for sexual favors,
Mm-hmm.
and so I always kept money, and people were like, "Where you get all this money from?" So I thought I always had a handle on things because I had money, I had nice clothes, but it was just a
But
mask.
when is the mask of having money, having clothes, having all these guy friends give you money?
Yeah,
When is it? When do you get so disgusted with
yes.
yourself or when do you realize that you need the Lord? Or when did you come to that point?
Well, I came to the point that I needed the Lord a little bit later down the road. There
Mm-hmm.
was a few things that had happened that I said, well, it was time to leave Chicago again after the
Okay, what
Sunday.
happened?
I was hanging out with this guy and not really hanging out with him, but I would see him and I would stop and talk with him. Sometimes I would smoke weed with him. We grew up together. We went to the same grammar school. He
Mm-hmm.
dated a couple of my girlfriends and he was killing women. I think he
He was
admitted
a
to
serial
a
killer.
serial killer. I think he admitted to 40 something women.
40 women.
Yes, that's what he admitted to.
Mm-hmm.
So, but the day before they arrested him, we were all hanging out. So, to see him go across that television that morning, I happened to be up watching the news with my dad, and he went across the news station, and something in my body just it was almost like this feeling when you want to throw up. I'm just gonna be honest,
Mm.
and I'm like, and I actually had him sitting on my porch smoking with me like a couple of weeks before this. It was just him and I.
So was this like a turning point for you?
That was when I know I needed to be mindful of the people that I was hanging out with, if that
Mm-hmm.
makes a difference. And so from that particular incident and some other things that had occurred, I believe my husband was really bad on drugs at the time. I decided it was time to leave again. I moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico. And when I moved to Albuquerque, I didn't hang out with, I watched my surroundings at that point. I was mindful of the people that I was around. However, that's when my addiction, that's when I realized I didn't have the gang around. I didn't have, you know, all of that around. I began to work at the university and realized that's where all my money was going, to drugs.